Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. President Donald Trump, facing the prospect soon of the longest US government shutdown in history, was considering declaring a national emergency that would likely escalate a policy dispute with Democrats over his proposed US-Mexico border wall into a court test of presidential power. To escape a political trap of his own making, Trump suggested strongly on Thursday that he might declare an emergency so that he can bypass Congress to get funding for his wall, which was a central promise of his 2016 election campaign. Trump is demanding that Congress provide $5.7 billion in US taxpayer funding for the wall. That is opposed by Democrats in Congress, who call the wall an ineffective, outdated answer to a complex problem. The standoff has left a quarter of the federal government closed down and hundreds of thousands of federal employees staying home or working for no pay. The partial federal government shutdown entered its 21st day on Friday. It will become the longest shutdown ever on Saturday. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at the US shutdown and President Trump's emergency threat. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, and Sriram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, will be joined by other guests as well during the course of the program. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. Your thoughts on President Trump's domestic woes?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, this is the promise that he had made during the 2016 election campaign. And this is his attempt to redeem that election pledge. And he has stopped working, a partial government shutdown as of 22nd December. He's demanding $5.7 billion from the taxpayers' money. And the Democrats have not agreed to that. Now, he had thought that this would be the way to pressurize the Democrats because Democrats took over control of the House at the beginning of January. So he thought that this would be the time that he could really start pressurizing. But this has not yielded the desired results. And now we see that today is the 21st day. That means the longest in terms of the shutdown. It has, so many shutdowns have taken place so far, about 20 of them. But the longest was in 95, 96, 21 days. And tomorrow it will be the longest shutdown. And there is no solution in sight, because they were meeting also on Wednesday, 2 days ago, between the presidents and the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House of Representatives, the new leader of the House of Representatives, and Chuck Schumer. And there was no result, there was no decision, there was hardly any discussion or negotiation, because, what the newspaper reports seem to suggest also, President Trump's Twitter account, he sent out a tweet. He said, he asked Nancy and Chuck, are you willing to agree to funding the wall? They said no. He stood up and walked out because there was no way that he could do business. And this is the same account that has been given by Chuck Schumer also.
Right.
So there doesn't seem to be anything in terms of negotiations that can bring the two sides together. And that's why he's threatened. Yesterday he visited the Mexican border. And he's threatened that he's going to declare a national emergency.
Yeah.
And if maybe this is using as a pressure tactic. But I think he also must be realizing that the options available to him are very limited.
Right.
And what is it that he can use as a threat? So at the moment it's a threat, but of course, knowing Mr. Trump, he could very well act on it also.
Anything is possible is what you're suggesting. Let me go across to Professor Chaulia now. Professor, what really led to all of this?
Frank, I think the last two presidencies, Trump and Barack Obama, both have been marked by two general problems which are creating this kind of dysfunction in the US polity. One is this extreme polarization between right and left, or liberals and conservatives. And second is the partisanship, the idea that you work only for your party interests or even narrower cliques within them and not for the general national or public good. these have become very mainstream, and the society also has been more or less divided. We saw it in the presidential election in 2016, almost 50-50 for Trump and for Hillary Clinton, and even more recently in the congressional elections. Again, it's a mixed verdict where half of the society believes that there is no need for any wall and that they must have a more liberal approach to immigration and labor issues stemming from Latin America. The other half wants a very, very hard line, and Trump is channeling that anger, which believes that they are being flooded by criminals and rapists and terrorists. Now, the liberals say that this is post fact. What Trump is basically, he has concocted a crisis when there was none. But from the Trump point of view and the populists that he represents, the other half of the country, many of them are very insecure, culturally insecure, economically insecure. They are afraid of being inundated by migrants, and they blame them, the outsiders, for the economic stagnation and the lack of wage rises in the US economy. So if you see, this is a very, very heady mix. It's a bit like the Brexit situation in the UK, where, almost half of the country believes in one reality and the other is living on another planet altogether. And dysfunctional society, this is a classic symbol of that. What Trump is doing, he's showing marijuana, and he's showing currency notes, and he's showing smuggled weapons, and he's giving press conferences and creating that. It's a politics of fear. And I think he believes that after the debacle his party faced in the recent legislative elections, he needs to up the ante and show a more militant face. There are people within the right, Ann Coulter, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity. These are the hardline right-wing commentators in the media. They are saying, Trump, you will lose your base if you stop being militant. Okay. So I think he has taken that to heart, and he's being militant, and that is why this kind of tussle has come with no resolution in sight.
All right. Let me welcome on the program now Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Professor, how do you see all of this panning out, really? The ambassador is suggesting that at the moment, national emergency is being threatened by President Trump. Will he actually go through with it?
Well, he may just. I think both the panelists made a comment which I think underscores a larger reality in many of the Western liberal democracies today, is the nature of politics is undergoing a fundamental transformation. And a lot of what we are witnessing, whether it is the rise of the far right in Europe, whether it is what Mr. Trump is doing in the US, whether it is Brexit, it is all a reflection of that underlying polarization. That there was a time when someone like Tony Blair would argue, or Bill Clinton would argue, that the best way to win an election is to win an election from the center, is to take your politics from the extremes to the center, broaden your base, reach out to the other side, bring as many of those who are on the other side into your stream of thinking, and thereby win an election. That used to be the standard democratic model, and academics studied it for a long time as to who wins and who loses in liberal democracies. I think now the trend is that you reach out to your base and you rally your base to win elections. And Mr. Trump has his victory, he owes a lot to this strategy. Where he rallied his base on certain issues, on high power issues, live wire issues, and he rallied his base to an extent where the other side could not counter him. Similarly, I think for the Democrats now, the question is how much do they give in to the negotiation that is happening? So rather than giving in to what they believe is something that Mr. Trump's base would accept, they would rather take their base's baseline and say we want to fight for it. And so the result is a deadlock, which I think both the Democrats and Mr. Trump in particular is enjoying. And you should also see how many of the so-called who used to be at the center, Lindsey Graham, for example, a senator, who at one time was seen as a voice of moderation, is now saying don't give up, because you have to fight for this, and if need be, you declare an emergency. So I think the pressure on Mr. Trump is basically to say that, look, my base should be happy. And it doesn't matter if there is a shutdown, if this becomes the longest in history, if there's I think this sends a message that he's determined to stay the course on which he's elected, and therefore if these issues matter to his base, he would stand up to those imperatives.
As this politics between the Republicans and the Democrats goes on the other side of it, Ambassador, government employees continue to suffer. There is a shutdown. We're looking at probably the longest shutdown ever. The common man is suffering.
Absolutely, common man is suffering, and I think this politics will go on, scoring points over each other and sort of appealing to your base. But in my view, I think going forward, the president has a lot more to lose than the opposition, because two or three things. If you look also at past cases of shutdowns, it has always happened that presidents have tended to lose support as a result of these shutdowns. For instance, whether it was it didn't affect Clinton much in that sense in 95, 96, but it is said that he lost his support by 3% when the shutdown took place. Even before that, in 1990, when George H.W. Bush was there, and the shutdown took place only for 4 days, but his popularity ratings came down from 66 to 56, 10%. Now, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, his popularity ratings are not very high. So if he is losing out on that, and if, there was a poll that was conducted at the end of December, which said that 47% of the people who were polled, who were asked, who were questioned about this, 47% thought that Mr. Trump was wrong. At the beginning of January, that had increased to 51% who thought that Mr. Trump was the one who is to blame for this continued shutdown. Now, if you look at the common people, as you said yourself, Frank, there are people from security, from TSA, from transport, agriculture. They say that if, it continues beyond the 1st of February, after all, Mr. Trump has threatened that I am willing to continue for months and years. He doesn't care. I think that is going to really have a huge impact on the living standards, and also on the stability and the strength of the economy, because they say that every week of shutdown brings down the GDP growth by 0.1%. So already all these agencies who are tracking the growth of the American economy, they said last week of December, they have cut it down by 0.1%. The first quarter, they have cut it down by 0.25%. Now, US economy has been growing well, but if this sort of a thing continues, then across the board, and maybe, as far as the elections, midterm elections are concerned, they are gone. In my view, it was not such a great debacle as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, because, the Democrats expected a tsunami against the Republicans. That didn't happen. Every time at the midterm elections, the president tends to lose. So I don't think the loss was that huge as far as Trump is concerned. And he increased his Senate numbers. But he's really looking at the presidential election at the end of 2020. And I think that is where he wants to shore up his base and tell them that I have tried everything I could, even maybe impose national emergency, get it struck down by the court. That also will not, dissuade him, because he'll be able to go to the base and say that I have tried everything, and it is the systems that did not permit me to do what I wanted to do.
Absolutely.